spokespeople. I'd love to start with Caroline Voaden, please.
Thank you, Dr. Alan, and I thank my honourable friend for securing this very important debate. Last Saturday marked 2 years since the publication of the Hughes report, 2 years since Patient Safety Commissioner Dr. Henrietta Hughes set out clear, compassionate recommendations for redress for those affected by sodium valproate and pelvic mesh. And yet 2 years on, families are still waiting. Women are still suffering, children still living with devastating disabilities, and the government is still silent. As many others have said here this morning, I too salute the courage of all those who have campaigned so hard on this issue for so long, many of them doing so while living with devastating injury. And I would like to share the human cost of this scandal, an example of a life destroyed by a medical procedure that was badly performed and went horrifically wrong. This is the experience of my constituent, Susan. In 2009, Susan underwent a transvaginal tape procedure for mild stress urinary incontinence. The mesh was catastrophically misplaced, causing immediate and lasting harm. Within months, her health had deteriorated so badly that she was forced to close her CQC-registered medical clinic and abandon a professional career that she had built up over 3 decades. Believing the mesh to be the cause, she sought help and was referred to a surgeon presented to her as an expert in mesh removal. She gave clear written consent for the removal of all remaining mesh. Instead, unbelievably, an additional reconstructive procedure was carried out without her knowledge or consent, never discussed beforehand, never explained afterwards, and not even disclosed to her GP. She was then told that the mesh was probably all removed. It was not. Years later, specialist MRI imaging confirmed substantial mesh remained embedded in her pelvis and abdominal wall, and by the time the truth became clear, she was out of time to pursue a legal claim. Recently, when Susan tried to pursue her case again, the legal system demanded over £10,000 for a barrister's opinion. Given the loss of her high-end professional career, she simply no longer had the financial means to proceed. The financial ruin caused by the mesh injuries had effectively barred her from accessing the courts and seeking the compensation she so rightly deserves. Today, she lives with constant pain, severe incontinence, chronic infection, and profound psychological trauma. Her financial losses run into the hundreds of thousands of pounds, and she is still waiting for a government response that should have come 2 years ago. And I would also like to share another constituent's experience, Caroline. In 2016, Caroline underwent mesh insertion. Within just 3 weeks, serious complications began. But what followed was not prompt medical care. It was 6 years of being repeatedly dismissed and gaslighted by multiple healthcare professionals, including the very surgeon who had implanted the mesh. When Caroline raised concerns during an internal examination, the surgeon's demeanour changed significantly for the worse. Her symptoms continued to be disregarded, and for 12 months she had to persistently self-advocate before finally being referred to a specialist mesh complication service. The specialists identified that the mesh had twisted, leaving her with no option but full mesh removal surgery. That surgery took place in July 2023, more than 7 years after the original procedure. The impact on Caroline's life has been devastating. She has endured years of significant physical pain and declining health. She's been forced to become financially dependent on her personal savings, as her ability to work has been severely limited. Universal credit and NHS travel support are means tested, leaving her out of pocket for essential medical travel and other related expenses. Susan's story is not just one person's story, neither is Caroline's. Across the country, thousands of women are living this reality every single day. Women are living with chronic pain, infections and life-altering complications from pelvic mesh implants, mesh that was supposed to help them but instead has eroded into organs, caused urinary problems, bleeding, left them unable to work, unable to exercise, unable to have intimate relationships with the people they love. In short, unable to live normal lives. And as well as this, children are living with devastating neurodevelopmental disorders and birth defects caused by sodium valproate exposure in the womb. Parents at breaking point, struggling with the emotional, practical and financial burden of caring for children whose conditions were entirely preventable. as Janet Williams and Emma Murph, two mothers of children with fetal valproate syndrome, wrote to the Prime Minister and Chancellor, families affected by sodium valproate exposure do not have the luxury of time. Our children are growing, their care needs are increasing, and their families are at breaking point. Let me remind the House of the timeline of this shameful delay. In July 2020, the Cumberledge Review recommended urgent redress. The government refused. 2.5 years later, they finally tasked the Patient Safety Commissioner to look at this issue again. On 7th of February 2024, 2 years ago, last Saturday, Dr. Henrietta Hughes published her report. It was unequivocal, calling for an independent redress scheme including £100,000 interim payments for valproate victims and comprehensive medical and financial support for MESH survivors. These were not radical demands. They were the minimum response required to address preventable tragedies that have devastated thousands of lives. And yet the response remains a hollow promise of careful consideration. There was no published response from the last government, and 6 months into this one, we are still, not 6 months, 18 months into this one, we are still told action will come in due course. This delay is not just a bureaucratic failure, it is part of a disturbing pattern seen in the Primados and infected blood scandals. It is a pattern where women and vulnerable patients are ignored, evidence is dismissed, and recommendations left to gather dust. Running through it all, as Susan and Caroline's cases demonstrate so starkly, it is a persistent culture of cover-up and denial. Compensation alone is not enough. We must ensure that such harm is never inflicted again. The Liberal Democrats are calling for a policy response that protects patients from the horrors of mesh implant side effects in absolute terms, with a full and continuing moratorium. Far too often, recommendations from inquiries into medical scandals are neglected. There should be annual reporting to Parliament on progress, including on how the government is addressing every issue highlighted by the Hughes report. And central to preventing future scandals is ending the culture of cover-up that has been exposed time and again by medical scandal inquiries. The culture that allowed Susan to be told her mesh had been removed when it had not. The culture that allowed Caroline to be gaslighted for 6 years by the very professionals who should have helped her. And the doubtful legal procedures outlined by the member for Chesham and Amersham. That is why we support the Public Office Accountability Bill, the Hillsborough Law, which will enshrine a statutory duty of candour on all public authorities and provide bereaved families with equal legal representation at inquests. The collapse of the bill at the 11th hour was deeply disappointing, and ministers now need to listen to the Hillsborough families and bring forward a solution with urgency that ensures everyone in security services too are covered by this law. But a duty of candour must go hand in hand with protection for brave individuals who speak up when they see harm being done. We strongly oppose the government's decision to scrap key patient safety organisations, including whistleblowing and speak-up programmes such as the National Guardian, and we also oppose moves to remove patient voice, including the proposed abolition of local health watch organisations. The sodium valproate and pelvic mesh scandals represent fundamental failures of our healthcare system to protect vulnerable women and children. It was a major failure of the last Conservative government not to deliver compensation, which has been recommended not only by the Patient Safety Commissioner but also by the Cumberledge Review which preceded it. The Liberal Democrats have consistently called for the acceptance of every one of the recommendations from the Cumberledge Review and for a fulsome response to the Hughes report, setting out how this government now will redress these terrible injustices. 2 years since the Hughes report is long enough to wait. 4 years since Cumberledge is far too long. And for women like Susan, who've been waiting since 2009 for justice, 16 years is unconscionable. Families deserve answers, women deserve compensation and corrective surgery where appropriate. Children deserve the support and care they need, and they all deserve justice. Everyone affected by the valproate and vaginal mesh scandal should have an apology, compensation, corrective surgery where needed, and psychological support. So I ask the Minister again, what active conversations are currently being held with the Treasury about redress payments? I urge the Government to commit today to publishing a full response to the Hughes report, to implementing its recommendations in full, and to ensuring that no family or individual affected by medical negligence ever has to fight this hard this long for basic recognition of the harm that was done to them. Thank you.